Hi, this is Steve Swayne. I'm here to give you a simple beginner's tutorial on how to create a 360 immersive image using ArtMatic Voyager, CTX, and this can then be viewed in Facebook or seen on a VR headset or posted to the internet to one of the 360 websites. So, a normal Voyager scene, but viewable in all directions, all the way around, straight down, and straight up. So let's just look at how we go about doing this. While we're looking at this one, you need to choose a location which has points of interest all around. So here there's mountains, there's a star and some planets over there. There's more mountains there. Below there's a lake and some scenery and mountains over there. So this scene has something to view all the way around. This is different to a normal scene because you've got to set it up so it is engaging and interesting in 360. Okay, so I'll exit that. Going to Voyager itself, basically you start by choosing your planet or your own custom surface, choosing your location, setting all the usual parameters for how you would like the scene to look. In this instance, what I've done is I've positioned the camera close to ground level, just above a sea, which I've made slightly rough and with a hint of transparency. I've also cranked the terrain vertical exaggeration to the max, just to make it really dramatic and unearthly in its appearance. What I've also done is I've added a few sprites to add some interest to the scene. So you can see here by the location, I've positioned myself near the coast, but with some islands and more land further away. So the way to set things up for a 360 is, first of all, if you're going to use the sprite editor, you pick a few sprites of interest and you want to sprinkle them around the camera. So what I've done here is I've put a bird close to the water surface for a nice reflection, and if I then scroll around the scene, I've put another sprite airship in there, which when it renders through you'll see also produces a reflection. So I've positioned that further away from the viewer than the eagle was and made it much larger so that it just looks more realistic in that position. And then further around again, I have put a submarine in the water just to create a bit of interest. Now these three objects are all around different angles of the viewer, so when this scene is rendered in 360, they will be in different parts of the image and will give something for the viewer to look at. You can't put them too close because then they'll be distorted and wrap around, so you've got to have them a reasonable distance from the camera viewpoint to look good in a 360 render. Okay, now I've put here a little checklist of things you should do for a 360 to set it up. So once you've got the scene sort of set up the way you want it, with the water and the land and the mountains and the point of the view and all the sprites, and of course they could easily have been DF objects as well as sprites either way. You would also position the DF objects around the scene like that. Spaceships in the sky, maybe terrain, buildings, what have you. Once you've got everything set the way you want it, you need to set up Voyager specifically for taking 360 shots. And we'll just run through this checklist. Okay, first of all, you've got to set the zoom in the scene view, the focal angle, to the widest possible setting, and that becomes 360 degrees. You can see there that's now shrunk all the landscape down to a tiny bit you see in the middle, and the sky occupies the top half and the reflection the bottom half. And you can also see there where I've positioned those three sprites pretty well equidistant from each other. the airship, the submarine, and the bird. Okay, so zoom right out to the left, set to 360. The next thing you've got to do is go into your environment settings. Sorry, wrong one. Whoops. Going to your camera settings. We want to set the vertical angle to 0. Now this is important because if the camera is aiming slightly up or slightly down, when you render a 360, the horizon will have a wavy wobble to it and won't look good. So vertical angle has to be set to 0 degrees. Horizontal angle, that really can just be adjusted to position which object you want to be in the middle of the point of view when the image is rendered. So you might want the airship, for example, to be in the centre. So I'll do that to about there. The next thing is you need to set the mode to spherical projection. Here you see camera mode. Normally it's set to cylindrical or perspective, but you want to set it to spherical projection. The next thing is, if you want to include a sky, apart from just clouds, you need to choose, this is one of the existing ArtMatic files, you need to choose one of these two, either ArtMatic 360 plus clouds, or just a direct ArtMatic 360. In this case, we'll just, for simplicity, just use the ArtMatic 360. Now, the two sliders you've got there is tilting up and down to affect how it looks. And the other one is left and right to reposition what appears where in the scene. There's not much point in having all the points of interest right up near the top because you won't see them, so try to keep things like stars and whatever relatively low to the central horizon line. So about somewhere like that would probably be ideal. And consider where they are in relation to, in relation to the sprites or other points of interest in the scene. In this case, I might position them away from the sun, so about here. This here is the sun, the Voyager sun in the scene, which again, you don't really want right up near the top because it won't look very good and it'll cast a poor shadows and highlights on the object. So have the sun fairly close to the horizon as well. The horizon in this case being the centre of the image. Okay, so we've now got the sky set up. We've got the land, the camera in the right position, the settings for everything correct. The next thing is to consider the renders we want to render. So in render settings, if we click on render to file, first thing is we need to choose a 2:1 aspect ratio. Now you've got a range of sizes there, and we'll deal with that in a second. But out of all the possible aspect ratios, to create a 360 has to be 2:1, twice as wide as it is high. You can, of course, make a custom size, which I probably recommend you do. The largest inbuilt one is 4K, 4096 by 2048. Now, something to consider, this render here has been rendered at those dimensions. So if you zoom in too far, it gets very pixelated looking. And if you zoom back out to about there, it's reasonable. If you would like to show a lot of detail in your scene, then you probably need to render larger than 4K. You can do this in ArtMatic Voyager by basically choosing a custom size and there you can put whatever size you like. For example, you might want to make it 8,000 by 4,000. If you use a custom size, it is very important that you keep the aspect ratio 2:1. 8,000 by 4,000 is 2:1, as would 6,000 by 3,000, 4,000 by 2,000, etc. You don't want to go too large, too crazy, because first of all, the render time will be horrendously long. And secondly, sites like Facebook will downsize your picture anyway to fit it into their website. And pretty much all the 360 hosting websites available on the internet will also downsize it. On the other hand, if you're doing this to view and share with other people, to view in a 360 headset, Oculus or whatever, the bigger the resolution, the better, the most realism. So if you're going to do it for a headset, you might do 14,000 by 7,000 or 20,000 by 10,000, whatever the biggest size Voyager will allow you to render at. But bear in mind, it will take a long time to render a very large file, especially if you go all the way and have fancy DF clouds and cast shadows on and intricate objects, fractals or what have you. So bear all that in mind. It's always a trade-off between size, resolution and render time, unless you've got the latest fantastic brand new Mac with a super fast render machine. So in this case, I'll just do a 4K render because it's enough for the job. So that's that setting. Okay, so just to recap, we've set the zoom to be far left. We've set the vertical tilt to be 0, so the horizon is precisely in the middle. We've set the mode to spherical projection. We've set the sky to be a 360 sky. We've set the render size to be a 2:1 ratio and set it to be the size we want. We're now ready to really commence the render. So first of all, I recommend you set the quality to better. There's really not a lot of gain doing sublime or best, unless this is your once in a lifetime mega render that will be seen 20 million times and loved. But otherwise, better is adequate. If you're just testing, do it as draft or good, just to get it set up the way you like. Once you're happy, then use better. That's the one I normally use. And this one here is rendered in better. Now, rendering to disk, we've got the choice here of making it a TIFF or a PNG or a JPEG for that matter. I would recommend doing it as a TIFF. The reason I do that is that I like to have a bit of control in post work using an app such as Photoshop, just to tweak the colour, the vibrancy, and the darkness and the lightness, that sort of thing. Gives you more control than you have in the settings within Voyager. If you do it in JPEG, you'll be double saving a compressed, lossy JPEG. So in this case, I would recommend doing it in TIFF. The output bears no impact on render time. It's just the final few seconds when it's saved. So I would say render it as a TIFF. If you don't use Affinity Photo or Photoshop and you just want to render it and be done with it, choose JPEG because that is the format you need to use for posting online to Facebook, for embedding metadata, which we'll come to later, and for viewing in other websites. So TIFF if you want to do some tinkering with it later, or JPEG if you just want to save it. Once you're happy, it's all ready to go, you can click render and it will commence the render. So I'll do that now. I'll pause this recording and continue once the render has completed. Okay, the render has completed. In my case, I saved it out as a TIFF file. I then took that file into Photoshop and slightly tweaked it to be a JPEG. You can see I just slightly increased the vibrance and the colour. That's all I did. So this is the JPEG, the final result. You can see it's the same pretty much as the Voyager scene there. The one thing to note is that this file has been saved as a JPEG, but the metadata is pretty basic. All it says is dimensions and the colour space and that sort of thing. So to get it to work on Facebook or a 360 website, there's a need to add metadata to let those other websites know that it is a 360 equirectangular image. Now, it's a very easy process to do that. I use an app called Exif Fixer on the web browser. If you just type into a Google search Exif Fixer, 2 words, one of the first hits will be the website by the creator of the app. It's a very simple little utility, and you can basically download it. It's free. It works. You can donate if you appreciate it, and it works on various platforms. So you just choose the version you want and download it. Or it looks like he's changed the website now. You can actually do it online by uploading the image and getting it done online and then saving the file back. So it couldn't be easier. Exif Fixer is the way to go. We'll quit that, we don't need it anymore. Right, so in my case, I've got Apple Macintosh operating system. I just take this file and drop it onto the app and add the metadata, and it just simply replaces that file with the version with the metadata in. So I can now quit the app. Right, so we've now got the final image. We'll just test drive it in the Ricoh Theta viewer. Oh, by the way, there are lots and lots of ways you can view a 360 file on a desktop computer. This is the one that I use. It's basically free. You can get it from the internet, from the Ricoh website. Just type in Ricoh Theta app in Google and you'll find it and you can download it. There's other apps that'll do it. I like this one because it's very elegant and easy to use. In this case, it'll let you auto-rotate it. It'll let you view it in full screen. It'll let you zoom in. And you can see there that our 360 scene is 360. And the sprites look nice in the scene. As I said, if they'd been too large or too close, they would have appeared distorted. But in this instance, they look quite nice because they're a reasonable distance away. One trick, of course, is one trap, I should say. You've got to consider, I'll just pause that, where the sun is. In this case, the light is sort of coming from the wrong area. But because we've got that star there as well, it doesn't really matter. But you might want to consider the light source to match the sprite's illumination when it was created. But I think this is quite a reasonable result. The sprites add a bit of zap to the scene. You can't zoom in super close because it's a bit blurry. If I'd rendered it higher resolution, it would look better. But the size, you'll see it on a web browser or on the internet, is usually that sort of size, or if you're viewing it on your smartphone, it'll probably be sort of that size. So it'll look quite reasonable. So that's how easy it is. Once you've got the metadata in the image, you're ready to go uploading it. Very small file size, as you can see. Even as a TIFF, it's reasonable. As I said earlier, if you intend to view it on a headset, like an Oculus, then you might want to consider rendering it to a custom size and cranking it up, 10,000 by 5,000 or something like that. Whoops, it didn't work. Be careful of typing too fast. Always use wise to check with the preview before you start the render. It's still not right. There we go. Right, 10,000 by 5,000. That is a trap when you type in numbers. They don't always register. So be careful you get it right. Always use that preview because it saves you the grief of running off and coming back to find the render was the wrong dimensions. If it isn't exactly 2:1, the render won't work in Facebook. It won't work as a 360. So I will upload this now to Facebook and we'll then see what it looks like inside Facebook. The Worlds of ArtMatic public group in Facebook loaded into Google Chrome. Now, one thing to notice here, Google have changed the way their website works, which has really hampered uploading of 360 images. Because of the way they've done it, if you try to upload a 360 using their new interface, it doesn't let you edit the 360 spherical image properly. There's a way around this by using Google Chrome and downloading a plugin. I use one called Switch to Classic. It's one of the plugins for Google Chrome. What it does is on a page such as this group, if I activate that, it will show me the original way that Facebook looked on a web browser on a computer. This lets me upload properly a photo to Facebook that's 360 and let me edit it. So I'll just explain that by doing it. So you open the interface, it's test place 2. It'll upload that, which takes a few seconds. Now, the new interface won't work properly because it won't offer you that little Edit 360 settings button. I don't know why they mangled it, but it doesn't work anymore. So now you can, if you use the old interface. And the key here is it lets you zoom in or zoom out to set it the way you want your initial view to look. I might start it with the submarine so people have the surprise of finding the airship and the bird. And I'll zoom in, not all the way because it's horrible and blurry, but about so like that, include the sun. So that'll be my opening way of viewing it. Click Save, that now changes the initial setting. I can now post that and that's the way it will look initially when seen on the Facebook page by anybody. And they can now drag and view it and see all the objects in the scene. So it's fairly straightforward. I hope the steps in creating that, which I'll recap one final time, make sense to you. So if we go back to the Voyager interface again, so you set the zoom to full 360, you set the vertical tilt to 0 degrees, you set the mode to spherical projection, you set the sky to ArtMatic 360 or ArtMatic 360 with clouds, depending on what you want. you set the render size to either a custom, which is precisely 2:1 aspect ratio, or use one of the 2:1 default settings. You set the render to better quality as a recommendation, and you then click and commence the render. Once the render completes, you've either chosen to save it as a TIFF if you wish to do further adjustments in Photoshop, or Affinity Photo, which is another program which will support 360 images. Now, the reason that's important is you don't want a seam line created by adjusting settings, and Photoshop will not create a seam line, neither will Affinity Photo. Other apps you may use might create a seam line. If you do that, you save it back to JPEG. You then run the Exif Fixer utility to add the metadata, and you can then test it in a 360 viewer app, and then away you go, publish it or view it on your VR headset. I hope that explains the process. It's very straightforward. Voyager treats it no different to any other render. Because it's rendering in 360, I don't think it takes any longer. Perhaps it would if it was a very complex, say a 360 fractal object, a 3D fractal object you were positioning in the middle of, and all around you was complex shapes, refractions, reflections, or what have you. That obviously would take a lot longer to render. But I find that they render pretty well. Keep it simple to start with. Voyager landscapes look fantastic rendered in 360, even without all the fancy addition of sprites or DF spaceships or what have you. The cityscapes look amazing rendered in 360. So have a go at the Utopia City, and the best of luck in your renders. Thank you very much for viewing. See you later.